Well, Republicans are still showing a lot of respect for the president, but they are worried about these developments because they do get in the way of what they consider, and even some of the president's critics consider, to be a good economic agenda, a strong pace in job growth, strong retail sales, ending the month as we did on housing data that was also strong, an indication that maybe the second quarter ended on a high note and could have grown more than 4%. No way of knowing this much. We do know Republicans are concerned, well, this stuff gets in the way of that. To GP pollster Chris Wilson, U.S. News and World Report contributor Ashley Pratt, and Olympic media managing editor Katie Freitas. Katie, what do you think of that? That they're trying to, sort of pivot the president back to the economy, talk about the economy, talk about job opportunities, which he's doing a great deal of today, because this is a winner for them. Everything that transpired in Helsinki, despite what the president says, is not. What are you hearing?
Well, it's always hard to kind of get Trump to focus away from something negative that's happening to him and on to positive things that he can push. He always likes to stick on the negative. But at the same time, I mean, Republicans were right if they're going to push back on the unmitigated disaster that was his press conference with Vladimir Putin. They're right to do both things at the same time. You can criticize someone and also support them on other issues. This is not either you're a Democrat, so you like everything Democrats do, or you're a Republican, so you like everything Trump does. And I think they're right to try and get him back onto the economy, get him back onto the good numbers, look at the good things that are happening to America. But at the same time, you got to sit back and say, well, you weren't great last week.
Chris, is this a crisis that shall pass, or does it stick? I mean, a lot of people say they want to see notes of that meeting, what transpired, what they agreed to, that it goes back and forth. And obviously Democrats won't drop it. But a lot of, Republicans are concerned about what actually transpired there. Where is all this going?
There was just a national poll that came out of the field from Gallup in which they asked Americans what the top issue facing our country was. And Russia was 38th on the list. So I'd have to name 37 other issues before we'd even get to this in terms of what voters are concerned about or what people care about right now. And I think the challenge the Democrats have with this is when you have Nancy Pelosi making the sort of comments that you just played, she becomes so unhinged about everything, and not everything can be a crisis. And they've got to pick one or two things if they want to make something a crisis. So the more the Democrats are out there calling for impeachment or calling for hearings or calling to subpoena translations, it sort of causes the American people to tune it out and think that it's just another made-up crisis that, to take the words of Rahm Emanuel, that they're trying not to let go to waste. And in the meantime, the economy is going to keep humming along, and Republicans in Congress are going to keep trying to do more to create more jobs and to keep that process going and the economy strong.
Yeah, so they hope. Ashley, I mean, it's Republicans, too, who were concerned when they first heard or saw this performance of the president, fairly or not, that he wasn't tough enough. And so to a man and woman, they did come out and express concern. And I'm just wondering how that relationship now goes. They're not taking him on to say, wait a minute, we're going to go after you on the floor of the Senate, for example, and sort of police further actions that we can take on our own. I think they have a measure considering additional sanctions if the Russians do this again, but it so far has no teeth in it. But how do you see this going?
There's a couple ways I see this going, and each time we think that he can't dig himself out of a blunder or a hole that he falls into, he somehow does. But with that said, while he's been at odds with many in the Republican Party, many moderates in the Republican Party, or those that people would label as establishment, they have often gotten behind him when it comes to an economic agenda, wanting to propel that forward on behalf of the Republican Party. But when he does things like this, which when you have Newt Gingrich coming out, who's been one of Trump's most, I think, articulate supporters in a lot of ways on almost everything, he'll come out and clarify what the president has said. When he comes out and disagrees with something that's been done and says this needs to be rectified, that poses a bit of a problem, and it gives those establishment Republicans a leg to stand on when they're going after him. So I do think moving forward, Republicans really need to figure out what they're going to do here. Are they going to fall in line with everything the president does by way of just a unified agenda, or are they going to fight him tooth and nail on everything that's going to happen, given the fact that they don't think that he can control his tongue and can possibly wind us up into a dangerous situation with a dictator in Russia?
Chris, obviously, to your point, this sort of subsides, but some of them were not giving up on the idea of punishing Russia for actions it might be considering now in this election. And I'm wondering, when I was talking to Ohio Senator Rob Portman, who was leading this effort to get sanctions going and talking about the support he has of the overwhelming majority of Republicans, the next question was, all right, then what do you do if the president says he doesn't like this? He couldn't answer.
Well, it is a difficult question to answer, because I think anybody who looks at our election system and doesn't have a complete respect for the integrity of it and making sure that no foreign power has the ability to cause issues there, that's very problematic. And so that is one issue where I think you're going to find Republicans working together, and hopefully if the intelligence community is also there saying that we've got to make sure that we've got to take sanctions against a certain country for trying to interfere, then I hope that is one where the president and Republicans can all come together and agree.
Do you think they can, Ashley?
I don't, because I feel we have a president currently who, when he makes contradictory statements on his positions on Russia and says that, he probably will have the best relationship with Putin. I believe that was a direct quote from him today. That stands as a bit of an issue with many Republicans as well as Democrats, because aligning yourself, again, with a dictator in Russia doesn't seem to really align itself with U.S. ideals and the way that Americans typically have portrayed themselves as a home for freedom and against the communism and whatnot that we have seen portrayed in Russia. So I do think that this is going to be a larger issue moving forward, because while he thinks he's being tough on Putin, saying that the U.S. is foolish and siding with Russia over U.S. intelligence agencies, that sends a very wrong message to the American people and to those that he's trying to work with in Congress when it comes to either A, slapping more sanctions on them, or B, moving forward with a stricter policy against the elections.
Do you think, though, that this frenetic activity, Katie, to go after the president on this and so much more does, and it's something Chris touched on at the outset here, make the other side look like it's a little too zealous, a little too, derangement syndrome-like?
Well, I don't think so. Again, I said this before. It's really important to knock someone if they've done something wrong. You shouldn't point out things that have been done wrong just because someone else is going to do that same thing. I will say, though, to Ashley's point, the problem with Trump is he needs to stop. You can't be flattering Vladimir Putin. You can't be doing that. You can't be saying nice things to him, because then on the left, they'll shake their fists and they'll scream that Trump's in bed with all the dictators in the world. And that's, of course, not true. But it lends some sort of credence to this irrationality, and that doesn't help anyone.
All right. Thank you very, very much, guys. Appreciate that.